Hi, morning. This is Michelle Marius of Project Calls. Welcome to our second webinar, Opportunities on Caribbean Development Bank Finance Projects, which we are hosting in conjunction with the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB. We do have a packed schedule this morning, and just to give you some insight into the agenda, we'll be starting with the discussion on the education, social sector, and agriculture with Martin Batiste, and thereafter we'll be following with the focus on economic infrastructure and renewable energy projects with William Ashby. We have some question and answer sessions throughout the activity this morning, as we hope to be able to keep the schedule pretty tight and allow us to get through the presentations that we have. After a dedicated time for questions and answers, we will move on to discussing environment and climate, and finally trade facilitation. We do expect quite a number of people on the call today, and we do encourage you to use the chat as well, as we may not be able to get through all of the questions in the time allotted. And we have allocated 2 hours, which is quite a substantial amount of time for this conversation. And without further ado, let me invite Martin Batiste, who is will be discussing education, social sector, and agriculture related projects. So over to Martin. Thanks very much.
Opportunities related to CDB's financing across borrowing member countries. It's a delight to be here, and I'm going to focus on the bank's social sector portfolio, education, and others, as mentioned. And I'm going to talk about, give you a sense of the scope of our operations in the social sector, and then to share with you some opportunities that exist. They would be illustrative and indicative, but certainly, as you would hear later on, once you keep in tune to the bank's website, looking at procurement opportunities, you would in fact be able to see all of the avenues through which you are able to provide the technical assistance and other kinds of support that is required across our member countries. Just give me 1 second to get this. I'm going to start sharing again just to make sure that I get this right. Okay, voila. So the bank social sector is one of the divisions within the projects department that focuses on the social aspects of our engagement and our development financing across our borrowing member countries. We have a few key areas of focus, of course, education and human resource development, agriculture. Social protection is emerging as an area where countries, certainly in the context of COVID, to ramp up and enhancing the social protection systems to support those who are vulnerable, because of course COVID exposed some of the gaps that we have in our social protection system in terms of providing support to persons, unemployment insurance, and that kind of thing. And gender, of course, is a big area of the bank. The gender is mainstreamed across the bank's operations. We also are involved in country poverty assessments for the region, and there is the bank's signature poverty reduction program of Basic Needs Trust Fund, where we also have a number of sub-projects focused mainly on community-focused development, but of course, the areas include education and training technical assistance, also water and irrigation, but also economic infrastructure. And so we have a fairly wide portfolio so that across the social sector, the bank through the has for the last 27 years provided over $550 million in funding, which is a significant percentage of the social sector portfolio. And the supporting social sector targets all sectors, certainly, and I'm speaking here about education in particular, from early childhood right on to tertiary education and all types of projects. So we do have capital projects where we fund the construction of schools, and we provide technical assistance, consultancies, training as the countries try to build out the education system. And as we move, certainly in the 21st century, to look at further transforming the education sector so it is more responsive and inclusive. Our research over the last few years, we've done quite a few knowledge products to really help the region as they navigate this space. So just to give you a sense of what we do, so all types of needs, all types of sectors, all types of needs. So whether it has to do with strategic planning and sector analysis, teacher training, curriculum reform, TVET and skills development has emerged over the last 10 years as an area where countries are in fact making significant investment for obvious reason, because we need to build out the skills development profile of countries to deal with making sure that persons within the country are trained to respond to the economic needs in key sectors such as the blue economy, the orange economy, digitalization, construction, and so on. Those are hospitality and tourism, to make sure that you have a skilled workforce focusing on certified on certification. Of course, we do facilities. We talk about climate resilience, schools infrastructure. ICT, as I mentioned, is a big one that countries are moving to, especially post-COVID. And an area that we also are focusing on across the region has to do with learners at risk, special needs, education, persons with disabilities, to make sure that we widen the access to those who are vulnerable, even though that we have, for the last 30 years, of course, been able to democratize access to education. In terms of where we provide funding in education, in basic education, primary and secondary, we have projects in quite a few countries that they have listed here: St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, Belize, Haiti, and even in Suriname. In TVET as well, we also have, as I mentioned earlier, quite a few projects across the region, and that is expected to increase and to be amplified over the next 2 to 3 years. And in tertiary education, we also have projects in UWI, University of West Indies, Guyana, where we have a project focusing on a hospitality training institute. And in Anguilla, we're just wrapping up a project with the Anguilla Community College. So as you see, we're fairly widely spread across the region, across the countries in a number of areas. Just to share with you quickly, a snapshot of some of the opportunities that are project specific, and we would share this presentation at the end of, so that you will have access to it. In the Bahamas, we have the BTVI enhancement project, where we're just maybe midway in implementation. And we're talking about rehabilitation and upgrading of the technical labs and so on. But I want to point out some of the consultancies that are still yet to go out. There is a consultancy focusing on improving the student services system in BTVI, and that certainly will be going out over the next 2 months or so. There is also the need to develop a tracer study system and also develop a national qualifications framework for the Bahamas. And that will be going out. And of course, one of the key outputs of the project also has to do with developing a BTVI master plan, where they hope to, through the consultancy, provide a sense as to how the campus in Nassau and in Grand Bahama, what's the vision for that in terms of physical development going forward. So there are some opportunities here. In Belize, we have also a project that we are in fact on the implementation, about 30% complete now. But we are going to, over the next couple of months, you will see advertisements to assist Belize with an early identification system for learners at risk. And they've also asked for support to look at their special needs policy and curriculum. And they're also looking at a financing framework for financing education. And so those are also consultancies that would be advertised in the next couple of months. In the case of Guyana, I mentioned the hospitality and training, the Hospitality Institute. We do have a project that would be looking at a strategic visioning plan. Those are in blue on your left of your screen, a business continuity plan and enterprise risk management system. and to look at a public education and marketing framework. Those would move quickly into implementation over the next few months, so you can look out for those opportunities. And finally, I want to share with you our UWI Digital Transformation Project approved just last year and about to move into implementation certainly by the next quarter. And I wanted to highlight two of the consultancies. One has to do with agenda analysis of the digital transformation within the university and to help with developing an agenda and digital technology ICT toolkit. That's really important to make sure that the digital transformation of the university across the region is fully engendered. And also there is also a consultancy to prepare a business continuity plan for the UWI to make sure that whether it is COVID or natural disaster, the university can in fact enhance its capacity to remain in business and to deliver its services to its learners and to its wider community. New opportunities, I just mentioned some of the projects that we have that are under preparation or almost there. St. Lucia in Haiti, we'll be doing 2 projects in Haiti, one at the end of this year and one next year, again in basic education and TVET, also Antigua and Barbuda. We also will be looking at projects in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I mentioned the UWI digital transformation, which in fact has already been approved. But we also have opportunities for projects coming through, some additional ones for the Bahamas and others that would be over the next 2 years or so. Under social protection, like I mentioned, a big area for us. So in St. Lucia, Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there are going to be projects that will be focusing on helping with the psychosocial and mental health capacity building training, looking at strengthening the social protection system. So at least it's much more inclusive and well designed. So you can look out for those opportunities as well. And in the case of gender, you would see advertised in the next 2 months. It's a technical assistance that the bank is doing as part of our support for our countries to look at assisting Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines with the preparation of a national gender policy and action plan. So that certainly would be out for support over the next 2 months. So this gives you a snapshot. And as I mentioned, once you keep keyed into the bank's website looking at procurement opportunities, everything would be advertised there. And of course, you could always contact us ourselves so we can certainly provide additional information as required. I want to end just with a couple thoughts about what we've seen over the last couple of years, especially COVID and post-COVID, and the kinds of proposals that we've seen that countries have eventually evaluated and those consultancies have been awarded. One, where there is a proposal tries to maximize the use of digital solutions for delivering assignments, especially in the context of COVID. Those things are really important, and those things help to make the proposal much more responsive. Of course, if you do have a local or regional expert on the consultancy team, that does add value to the proposal. And I know we're moving to remove most of the restrictions for COVID, but certainly because it's still tenuous, having a local expert on your team or a local firm that you partner with does help. So in case there are any constraints in travel for those who may be outside of the country, your local partner can in fact continue to provide the services. And we've seen that especially during COVID, where consultancy firms are able to continue to provide the services for which they had contracts, even though they themselves were not able to travel in person. And a key issue, innovation ideas. What do you bring that would advance the work of the sector in a new way? I think once ministries of education see proposals where they're cutting edge innovation ideas coming through, that certainly adds value to the proposals that you bring. So again, we welcome the opportunities that you are able to recommend your services for. And we look forward to continuing to provide the information to you as you do your very best to provide the technical assistance and other kinds of advisory services that our BMCs continue to ask us to finance across the region. Thanks again, everyone. And of course, like I said, we'll share the presentation so that you have that to reflect and to use going forward. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Martin. I think we're off to a flying start. we've set the bar quite high, and it seems wonderful the things that are happening in the education and social sector. Martin, if you can, I know that you have some appointments shortly, but folks, please engage Martin in the chat should you have any questions. We'll just move on to the next presentation, which is going to be delivered by Mr. William Ashby, Portfolio Manager for the Economic Infrastructure Division, and he'll be discussing the economic infrastructure and sustainable energy projects. So William, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to try to get started with my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Great, okay. So good morning again. And as you said, Martin set the bar quite high. So I'm gonna try to just share with you a bit about the Economic Infrastructure Division and the work that we do. Some of you might have seen some of this before if you participated in some of the previous opportunity sharing sessions that we've done, but this provides an update on all of the, or most of the opportunities that are currently available through projects being managed in the Economic Infrastructure Division. And this presentation has been made possible today with the help of all of the colleagues in the division. So the work that we do in EID involves the preparation, appraisal, and supervision of all manner of economic infrastructure projects. We also undertake technical assistance, which is provided for the preparation of projects, as well as supporting countries in the supervision, the implementation side of projects. We undertake sector studies across a number of areas, and I'll share those areas shortly. We've got a team that's entirely responsible for the fiduciary management of the bank's projects portfolio, our financial analysts. We provide support to our internal partners, and we also work with countries providing support in the aftermath of impacts from natural hazard events. The sectors that we operate in mainly, transportation, so covering roads, airports, water transportation as well, coastal protection, or sea defenses as we say, working in water and sanitation. That's a huge area for us. And energy, as you mentioned, the Sustainable Energy Unit, which was formerly the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Unit, is now housed within EID. We also work in urban development and solid waste management a lot there. And we'll share a little bit more about what's going on in some of those projects as we go through. So overall, since inception in 1970, the bank has provided about $6.8 billion in funding in all manner of instruments, loans, grants, contingently recoverable instruments, and so on. And of that amount, you'll see the distribution across the various sectors there. Transportation, about a quarter of funding has been towards the transportation sector. We've got about 23% up to the end of last year. Power, energy, water, and sanitation, about 12%, and so on. And of course, as we look across the distribution we've shown here, you know, there'll be some intersection as well. So these figures are not necessarily exact. Social infrastructure, for example, will include some of the some transportation components and that sort of thing. And last year, that's the distribution for the projects funded since during the period from January to December 2021. So the profile of our transport sector projects, as I mentioned before, covering all of the sectors, as well as supporting countries in the preparation of projects through feasibility studies and designs. We've undertaken a number of regional sector studies, recently completing one on planning for the integration of climate resilience in the road transport sector, for example, but also colleagues have done a lot of work in the air transport sector over the years. In water supply, the bank is actually at the moment undertaking a consultancy to develop or update its water and sanitation strategy. But lots of work across the water and sanitation sector, a lot going on across several borrowing member countries, including Guyana. There's a lot going on there at the moment. So hopefully soon there will be an opportunity for a capital investment project coming out of that. But at the moment, there's 2 consultancies already under implementation. Most of the work is in the water supply segment of that sector, but also significant work in the wastewater management sector, irrigation. And when we are doing projects in this sector, often there will be not just a focus on the infrastructure, but on a lot of capacity building and institutional strengthening and so on. And in some of the projects that you will see coming up, a focus on watershed management was incorporated as well. That's just briefly showing the disaster mitigation projects, and I'll move on to sustainable energy, where, again, several technologies across the renewable energy space. Colleagues in the sustainable energy unit are quite expert at supporting our borrowing member countries in the development of. So geothermal has been one. You might have seen a lot of activity in that space in recent years across the Caribbean, and the bank has been heavily involved in the project in St. Vincent, as well as in some of the others, some of which will emerge shortly. Lots of work across the solar PV space, including independent solar farms and also roof-mounted facilities across government buildings, for example. We've got projects exploring energy storage systems, and the wind energy space is one that's now emerging. E-mobility, similarly, a lot going to happen in that space shortly. Energy efficiency, some of the projects you'll see mentioned in the list coming up, a lot of streetlight retrofitting, changing over from mercury vapor and sodium lamps to LEDs and so on. And the rest of it, you can imagine upgrades of transmission and distribution infrastructure. And as I said before, a lot of what we do is in capacity building and helping countries in the preparation of those projects. So here we are quickly into an update on some of the projects, and you'll remember the devastating 2017 hurricane season. So one of the main responses in the aftermath of that was to support the British Virgin Islands after they were impacted by Hurricane Irma. A lot of work has happened already, as you could imagine, in the reconstruction of infrastructure there, but there's still some opportunities that will emerge, and we hope in 2022. One of the big ones is the construction of the West End Ferry Terminal, which was destroyed during the hurricane. So the consultants are working now on the designs for that new facility, so you'll see that. And there are a number of building works opportunities that'll emerge shortly on the rehabilitation of magistrates' courts, the central administration building, and some school infrastructure as well. I talked about the streetlight retrofitting, and in Suriname, one of the several countries where we've done that sort of project, there's a goods opportunity that's still available for advanced metering infrastructure, the supply and installation of that. That'll be advertised later in 2022. The contact information for the project coordinators for these projects on the slides we're sharing with you. We've got the email addresses and the names of all of those coordinators. Belize, another energy project there, the 7th power project, the Kikoka submarine project. which was approved by the bank in 2019. So the design and installation of that subsea cable and the construction of a substation and a switching station, that's one works opportunity that we expect to see in 2022, as well as procurement of the cable itself under a goods contract. I'm sure Doug will talk to you a bit about the various types of procurement overall that we undertake, so I won't get into it. Again, the Caribbean being quite a vulnerable space with regard to natural hazard events, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been supported with funding in the aftermath of several natural hazard events. So some are listed there, and these are the remaining works opportunities under those projects, which my colleague Jude Regis, who leads in supporting the implementation of these projects in St. Vincent, will be helping to bring into implementation in 2022. So primarily road works and bridge works. Staying in St. Vincent, and again, this one was sort of proactive support in respect of enhancing resilience along a coastal community on the windward side of St. Vincent, the Sandy Bay Sea Defenses Resilience Project. So this was approved in 2018, and the main activity, sea defenses, consisting of about 730 meters of shoreline protection through the construction of a stone revetment and river training. Those works we expect to become available to you in 2022. And this is the first of a number of the water supply projects you'll see. 6 water project, View Fort water supply redevelopment. 2 goods opportunities there. The supply of a SCADA system and the procurement of bulk water meters. So that project has been going on for a while, quite well advanced, but still 2 opportunities there. There were about 3 water projects we had going on in St. Vincent. So another was the 7th water supply, the John Compton Dam project. And there's another opportunity there for a goods project, the supply of rainwater harvesting equipment, tanks, fittings, and appurtenances. The contact information for the officer in charge at the Water and Sewerage Corporation is shown there. This project in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, again in the energy space, the objective being the increased supply of sustainable low carbon energy to the national grid, being implemented through VINLEC, the St. Vincent Electricity Services Limited, and a number of opportunities there. Overall, this project was funded by a loan of about 5.4 million, and a grant of 1.65 million euros, the 5.45 being $7 million US. And opportunities there are for works, design, supply, installation, and commissioning of solar PV systems, as well as some goods and a consultancy opportunity. I'm not sure if you're still seeing my presentation. I'm seeing something slightly different, but I'm going to guess you are, and I'm going to move on. Rehabilitation and reconstruction on Antigua and Barbuda. There's a project there under the UK SIF portfolio. Now this is a 330 million sterling facility provided by the United Kingdom government, being implemented through the Caribbean Development Bank. So we say UK SIF, it's the United Kingdom Caribbean Infrastructure Partnership Fund, and it's being implemented across 9 of the bank's borrowing member countries. So there's a dedicated team within the bank working on this project, comprising CDB staff, but supplemented also with staff from the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. So the objectives being to provide for these countries infrastructure which is going to be transformational to the economies of these countries, with a very strong focus on climate and disaster resilience, but also on enhancing inclusive design, inclusive infrastructure and services, and generally leading with regard to best practice for the provision of infrastructure. So 2 opportunities there under that project for undergrounding of electrical feeders and electrical works for reconstruction of electrical supplies disrupted during that the hurricane events in 2017. The Philip Golson Highway in Belize, another UK SIF project, a consultancy opportunity there for the design and construction supervision of works for the provision of safe school zones and minor works for the construction of those of works to provide for those safe school zones. One project that was approved last year, 2021, was again under the UK SIF Water Sector Strategic Development for the Commonwealth of Dominica, a UK SIF grant of about £24 million, and a number of opportunities there, which will go very quickly. Gender responsive and socially inclusive communication plan, that's one consultancy service available, as well as 2 goods contracts for the supply of GIS software and IT software and training, as well as the provision of some vehicles. The procurement under the Linden to Mabura Hill Road Upgrade Project, which is a huge project under implementation now in Guyana, funded through a loan of $112 million US dollars and a grant from the UK government of £49.8 million sterling. You'll see the opportunities there at the moment. The works have been advertised already and bids received by the government. And so what remains are 3 consultancy services contracts identified there. Upcoming later in 2022 under the UK SIF as well, water supply expansion and sewage improvement in Grenada. So none of the contracts under that project have been awarded as yet, because the project is still to be approved. But advertisements, if not out already, will be out soon for them. So if you are in the water supply space, this is something you should pay close attention to, as Martin said, monitoring the bank's website. Funding, including a £13 million sterling grant. Also in Grenada coming up, with funding likely to be in the amounts shown here, the West Coast Corridor Road Upgrade Project, the works contracts being available there still. And that's it, ending just about on time. I will be available to respond to any questions with support from the rest of the team here with regard to what we presented in respect of our economic infrastructure portfolio and the opportunities available at the moment. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, William. It's wonderful just to see the depth and the breadth of the projects that are going on in the region, which the CDB is supporting, as well as the opportunities that are available and those that will be imminent. Folks, if you have any questions, if you can raise your hand or put them in the chat. While we wait, William, a question from me. Similar to what Martin had done, are there any sort of tips or strategies that one would be looking for in terms of the submission? So whereas William spoke about, maximizing digital solutions, because I think with COVID, one realized how important it is to leverage technology and having like a local counterparts as part of the team, as much as under your division and the projects, many of them are either like construction or procurement related, but are there any sorts of thoughts and tips that one might want to give in terms of how entities could approach the proposals and the bidding process?
Okay, that's a good question, and pretty much the same will apply as Martin said, and we've seen that demonstrated across pretty much all the projects that have been under implementation during the COVID period. It is very much recommended that persons, if they are from outside the region, or even if they're within the region but not based in a particular country, think very strategically, deliberately about how they can actually deliver those services in the country as expected. Because despite COVID, the efficient, effective performance of implementation duties, that is absolutely essential for achieving the outcomes that the projects are aimed to deliver for the countries. So having local partners is one of the main things that we've seen add value to the delivery of some of these, certainly in the project preparation. So I talked about the Dominica project that was approved last year, and that was well demonstrated by the consultant in that case. The consultant was from Germany, but utilizing a lot of local partners. We've got, at the moment, in the transportation space and in the sector development work, we're working on a project in 2 of our countries to help to enhance the public transport systems. And again, they have found themselves working with the lead consultant being from Spain, but working with local consultants from Trinidad, from Haiti, and from St. Lucia, being able to deliver and being very responsive. So that's one of the key ones. Something else that's absolutely essential right at this point in time is to take cognizance of the impact of, and Martin also mentioned, the supply chain disruptions. So we need to have confidence when we're talking about these large capital projects in the cost estimates, the budgets, and the tendered amounts for the work projects. So is absolutely critical that consultants, when they're working to prepare these projects, or contractors when they're submitting bids and so on, be realistic about what's happening with regard to inflation around the world and the supply chain challenges that we're all facing. So those are some of the things that are kind of important for us right at this point.
Fantastic. Betty, go ahead with your question, please.
Thank you, Michelle. I noticed both William and Martin made mention of institutional strengthening with regard to the projects that CDB is looking at. Could William tell us what expertise are you looking for from consultants who are interested in the institutional strengthening projects? Or could you explain more about when CDB talks about institutional strengthening, what it is they're looking for?
Sure. So again, it'll depend on the particular sector, the particular institution, the particular project. So I can think of, for example, one airport project that we've been working on recently, and 2 of the consultancies that were included in that project. One was for the development of a sustainability management plan for that airport. And you can imagine airports are, and so I'm just giving you examples, but you can extrapolate across different sectors, right? So airports involve the use of a lot of chemicals. There's a lot of energy consumption with regard to air conditioning. They're aircraft generating a lot of fuel emissions, so air quality being an issue, fuels and spills and all manner of things. So sustainability being something quite important there. So if we need to strengthen the institution itself, looking at how it can perform the functions that is expected to perform, however that might be, through the development of policies. Another thing on that particular project was developing a policy for fixed base operations to help that institution to be able to maximize revenues from the development of their fixed base operation business. So while that business is existing and increasing in importance and relevance to that particular facility, they didn't have an FBO policy. So we thought helping them with that will help them. And they identified this, by the way, themselves. It wasn't something the bank came up with. We prioritized it in the project, but the need for it had been identified in that airport's master plan, that sort of thing. Across a lot of the work that we do at the moment, climate resilience is key. So some of the water utilities, we've done work to help them to be able to strengthen their capacity to undertake their operations with a view to the impacts of climate change for them over the next 20, 30, 40 years and so on. So to strengthen their internal capacity to undertake their functions along those lines, and whatever it might be. So looking at across, again, whenever we undertake projects, institutional assessments are undertaken. One of the main things we concern ourselves with, that's absolutely essential no matter what kind of project it is the capacity to implement that project. But particularly with regard to utilities and so on, looking at the way the businesses operate themselves, whether they've got, my colleagues who are the financial analysts will look at the capacity for managing human resources, looking at the way internal controls are managed within the organizations, looking at things like the internal audit functions and those sorts of things, and where there are gaps, they're identified and addressed. When there are public works ministries, again, looking at staffing, the capacity to undertake their functions outside of just the individual projects and how we can support strengthening those institutions. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. So I hope I've answered by those few examples. Thanks.
Could I say something in response to this?
Go ahead, please.
Yes, am I right in saying that with all those projects you mentioned, it's about looking at enhancing the effectiveness and the efficiency of the organizations? Is when we talk about institutional strength, is that the aim? That we're trying to enhance the effectiveness and the efficiency?
That's the aim.
Right, and with that aim, then management systems would come into play. So your consultant, then you would be looking for, apart maybe from a consultant with technical expertise, you would also be looking for a consultant who had that management system.
So absolutely. So the teams will tend to be multidisciplinary. The opportunities will always be multidisciplinary.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I see one in the chat, and it's about, it's from Nicole. She's asking, are climate resilience projects also looking at the crucial nexus between climate and gender and related approaches for climate finance?
So I think my colleague from the Environmental Sustainability Unit is going to speak this morning. So I think perhaps hold that question until he does. If you could come back to him.
And there's one about the environmental impact assessments and monitoring. Is that you, or would that be your colleague as well?
Well, it's all of us, but again, since that's squarely in the space of ESU, save some questions for my colleague.
Okay, so Hope and I, we're almost ready for you, and I guess you will get to those questions shortly. But I have just another question, and it came out of just what you're saying, William, but about sometimes in being careful in how one specs the project and recognizing the challenging times in which we live. And I don't know whether Doug might also want to jump in from the procurement unit, because it's probably a more general question in terms of how does a bank begin to manage like force majeure situations, situations where maybe a project cannot proceed because of X, Y, and Z. So for example, you were mentioning, William, about some of the logistical challenges that probably we're now seeing, and that may cause a project to, whether or not it might be delayed unduly or just it can no longer function as it had been envisaged. What are your thoughts, please? And I think, Betty, I saw you had your hand up, or are you okay?
Well, I was waiting I thought I could just type it in the chat, but
okay.
It was something that William said that I thought I needed for him to expand on a bit. Was he mentioned the idea of consultants outside the region subcontracting regional consultants. And what I wondered is, it seems to me if you're a Caribbean Development Bank and you're focused on the development of people, that should be a requirement, that consultants that are coming from outside of the region to be part of the requirement for them to get that consultancy would be that they bring in regional consultants to assist. So what I want to know, is that a policy of CDB committed to development?
Perhaps Michelle, I could come in?
Yes, please.
So it's a good question, and actually we do have a opportunity for the procuring agencies to have a preference within the scoring for consultancy services for the use of national consultants within a consortium. And that's actually in terms of the inputs, actually the man months those key experts put in, not in just trying to put a token person representation on the team. So it is there already. It's up to the procuring entities to take up that option. That's not something that we enforce on them. It's something that's there in the framework that they can use. So yes, that's perhaps some kind of opportunities there for pressure to be applied to some of the procuring entities to build the consulting capacity within the region. I just wanted to also pick up, Michelle, on something that you raised, which was the challenges we've seen over the last few years, the COVID, some of the natural disasters, and other sort of force majeure type situations. And that certainly has meant that the force majeure provisions within the contracts have been tested. There are force majeure provisions in nearly all the forms of contract used, but I think it has in many cases meant that we have had to speak with, or our procuring entities have spoken with us about some need for good faith negotiations when these unexpected situations do arise, and how in practice do we deal with that? Because within the parameters of the contract, there are provisions, but there also needs to be some good faith negotiations to find creative solutions to some of these problems. And also some of it does now go back to project design. Now that we've lived with COVID for a while, I think William and Martin spoke to this. How do we design some of the projects and the contracts to better deal with these challenges, and also to encourage our consulting community to come up with innovative approaches to deal with the environment as well? So just a couple of responses from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doug. Are there any other questions? Oh, Nicole, please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My question is related to what Doug was speaking about. If there is, this is my first engagement with something like this by the CDB. So do you have a list of companies for different areas of different categories of expertise across the different islands that an external company would be able to get access to?
Michelle, are you okay if I come back in?
Guys, go right ahead, please.
Thanks. Actually, let me turn on my camera.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. So yeah, it's a good question. So the opportunities, as a rule, are managed by the individual agencies who receive our financing. So they own the project, they own the procurement in nearly all instances. Therefore, usually they run a competitive standalone process. However, that said, we do have for consultancy services a register of consultants. We use that for our own needs, and we also share that with the countries. So it's not mandatory to be on that register, but it's something that is used both by ourselves and the countries. We would recommend you register on that. And for those of you who weren't able to attend the earlier session, I think you mentioned that this was the first one you joined, but we did have an earlier one, specifically an earlier such event as this, with project calls on how the procurement process works, how to leverage things like the register of consultants. And I'm sure Michelle can make that recording available. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I plan to do so shortly. Valerie, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, good morning. And it's not, I didn't know really where to ask this question. It would probably be at the end, but I have a competing call later on with Haiti. And Doug, perhaps this question is for you, and it's about bureaucracy, because many of our partners in the Caribbean have almost given up putting in anything for the CDB. I approach them with projects and they say, no, it's just too difficult working with the CDB on the bureaucracy. And I know that putting in proposals, and I don't think it's necessarily the CDB, but some of your partner countries, you put in a proposal, you hear nothing for months and months and months, not even an acknowledgement. It's difficult to get, if you don't win the project, a debriefing. And so I'm finding it increasingly difficult to find companies to partner with us that are willing to go through the bureaucracy. And I'm wondering, you know, it's a difficult question, and I hesitate in bringing it up, but I think it does need to be addressed, because it's just, we have ideas, we have things that can help in the Caribbean, but they're not going forward. Thank you.
It's definitely, I think, another one for me.
Yes.
And I think these conversations are good, such as we're having this morning, some of this frank feedback. As I said, the procurement essentially in the vast bulk of the opportunity sits with our recipient countries. Now, we know some of the countries have capacity constraints, and we know that this is reflected in some of the challenges that you've just laid out in the procurement process, in the speed of implementation. And this is an ongoing issue that we are in dialogue with the countries about. And I would say, I don't think this is a CDB specific problem. Our colleagues in IDB, World Bank, other agencies, bilateral partners also have the same challenges. So it's one of the things we are doing is we're looking at the project design side, how we can actually build in extra capacity. Specifically on the procurement side, we have actually set up a roster of procurement consultants, and I know some members of project calls are actually on that roster and have been providing services into the countries to try and speed up the process. That said, we still have to deal with country systems in many cases, tender boards, etc. And these are systemic problems that we have to work with. I will say this though, if you're not getting feedback as to what the status of a procurement is, you're not getting a response on a debriefing that you've sought, these are things that we do want to hear about. This is not just platitudes from us. We want to hear from you, and we will take that up with the countries. I can give you my assurance on that. And we do hear from consultants who are frustrated, and we will have the difficult discussions with the executing agencies to try and expedite the progress and at least get you those responses that you are due.
I think as well, standardizing and working with your countries to standardize some of the formats, just a little tiny thing that takes so long, especially for smaller companies, is you know, just on the templates, we have to put in people's CVs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody wants it in a different format. If we had one format that we could use for everybody, that
I
would
hear you.
send me just a day and a half of time.
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, on that side, I will say we do harmonize very closely with the other development banks. Of course, there are differences, but we meet every 2 weeks with IDB, with World Bank. Our forms of contract, our RFP forms, our works documents, our goods documents, they're 85, 90% the same. Even our policies and procedures, we all share those, we go through them. They're very, very similar. There are differences between some of the other agencies, but as far as possible, we do harmonize, and it is a work in progress. So that is recognized. I do actually come from a consultancy background, so I've been on the other side of the fence. I've been preparing the EOIs, preparing the proposals. I've been sitting opposite the contracting party. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, so you will know then that the amount of money it takes to put and time to put a proposal together. And so you examine each proposal and say, is this worth doing?
Absolutely.
And very often we say, no, it's going to be just too much of a hassle. Yes, it would be something we could easily do. So I appreciate your comments on that. And I appreciate you allowing me to be perhaps a little controversial.
No, that's fine.
People
we want to
sometimes are
hear.
afraid to bring it up because they don't want to. They say, "Oh, well, if I bring these difficult questions up, it may be a black mark against me." I'm old enough not to care about that.
No, absolutely not. And the other thing that I would say, and I said this in the first session we had on procurement. Of course, there are frustrations, and you have to make those critical decisions. But I think one of the drivers on whether you participate in CDB opportunities is looking at the level of competition. And the one thing we can say is that you are dealing with a reduced field of competitors for most CDB projects, whereas our resources, our membership is much smaller than the other banks. If you're looking at World Bank, IDB, and in turn, the competition is less. So that's just a factor to take into account when you're making those go, no-go decisions.
Thank you so much, Doug. Christine, you have your hand up, and I noted William's hand had been up a little bit as well. So if we can just take those 2 questions or comments and then move on, since we're just running a little bit behind, we can make it back up, but yes, go ahead.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Michelle. Just to add to what Doug said, and in response to one of Nicole's questions, in terms of having a list of suppliers, consultants, providers, or vendors on the whole, I know some might not have been able to attend our first presentation on procurement. I just want to remind folks that you can go to our website, www.caribank.org, and there you will find contract award information or notices. Those are notices that we receive from our implementation agencies, and you would find who are the winning bidders, as well as those who participated and were not successful. And they are categorized by sectors, themes, countries, type of the consultancies and works. So it's a good place to collect information on such consultants and contractors. Thanks. And that's all for now. Thanks.
Okay. William, we're ready to move on, but since you had your hand up for a little bit, I was wondering whether or not you had something specific you wanted to say.
No, it's fine. I think we're covered. So you press on.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Just in terms of just this robust conversation, of course, please continue with the conversation in the chat while we move on to our next speaker, who is Mr. Hopton Peterson, Operations Officer Environment in the Environmental Sustainability Unit. And Hopton, it does look as if we already have some questions for you, but at least please deliver your presentation, and then we will hear from you in terms of some responding to some of the questions that had been posed before.
Thanks, Michelle. Let me try to share my screen. Are you seeing anything? No?
I'm seeing something about building resilience and adaptive. I think you probably just need to go to the first slide and then put it in presentation mode.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you seeing the
Yes.
first slide now?
Yes, we are. So just put it in presentation mode for us and or slideshow.
Presentation mode.
Yes, slideshow. It's at the top on the ribbon. The tab continue to your right. Okay, great. It's now in presentation mode. Go ahead, please.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Compton Peterson, and I'm from the Environmental Sustainability Unit, one of the environmental specialists within the unit and also the bank. And as William mentioned earlier, for those who have participated in this, in a similar webinar, would be familiar with some of the content. Now, we start by basically saying that the bank recognizes that there's a strong relationship between sound environmental management and the attainment of sustainable development and poverty reduction in our BMCs, which of course forms the nucleus of the bank's mission. And so this commitment is necessary because we want to safeguard the environmental goods and services that are provided by the ecosystems with which we have. And much of this commitment is reflected in the development or the existence of the bank's environmental and social review procedures and performance requirements. And these procedures therefore represent our policies and guidelines, dictating and guiding us how to deal with environmental matters within the bank, generally and more specifically with our projects. So one of the core parts or requirements of the environmental and social review procedures is that all our projects have to be screened for environmental, social, climate, and I should also add gender risks and impacts. And generally, or for most projects, the environmental and social assessment is a key part of the project management cycle. So, and just let me say that environmental and social assessment is not used synonymously with environmental and social impact assessment. Environmental and social assessment is a generic term which is used to explain or to screen our projects, and depending on the risk and the likely impacts, we may or may not use ESIAs. We have several other tools that we may use, which we will refer to later. So the borrowers are required to conduct environmental and social assessments, and also more and more we are required to do climate risk and vulnerability assessments. Now, as I mentioned, I'm from the Environmental Sustainability Unit. It's a small unit, commensurate with the size of the bank, but we tried our best to carry out the work of the bank. We're responsible for the bank's portfolio, environmental portfolio, and so we lead the bank's environmental sustainability activities. We ensure compliance with the environmental and social safeguards, which we referred to earlier. And generally, we provide technical support to all areas of the bank. This could be just reviewing documents to ensure that the environmental and social requirements are considered. Now, Another key feature or part of our work in the environmental sustainability unit comes in the form of the role that we play in the appraisal of capital projects. And William would have outlined various sectors within which we work. And these, just for emphasis or emphasis, education, transport, agriculture, water. Of course, we don't expect to find work in health and tourism sectors because we don't focus on those. The bank doesn't support projects in those sectors. Now but of course, we also have standalone projects within our units, mainly in the form of technical assistance projects. So when we are, as William also mentioned earlier, that we do a lot of institutional assessments. Right? At all level in the environmental sustainability unit, we also engage in institutional capacity assessment because we're always looking out for opportunities to improve the manner. I think I need to go back. Right, we're always looking for opportunities to improve the capacity of the institutions with which we work so that they can do their work better in the area of the environment, in the area of the climate change, and also disaster risk management. And some of the areas of intervention, early warning systems, I won't go through all of them, disaster risk financing, climate change sector guidelines, land use plans, environmental and social management systems. And so for these interventions, we would need specialized skill sets for implementation. Then another very important part of our work has to do with the kind of instruments, environmental and social management instruments that we use. And so our main instrument is the environmental and social impact assessment. That's the main instrument. So most of our projects, would require an environmental and social impact assessment to be done. But not all projects, depending on the level of risk and the impacts, we might resort just to an environmental and social management plan. Or it could be just an environmental and social management system, which is the instrument which is used with financial institutions. Then we also have environmental and social management framework. So in cases where we have a number of projects for which the locations at the time of appraisal, we are not sure about the location as yet. The government has not decided where these projects might be, then we could not use environmental and social impact assessment because that's for a particular project. So we resort to environmental and social management framework, which basically provides guidelines and procedures for reviewing and assessing the environmental and social risks and impacts of the projects if and when the locations are decided. Then of course, all our projects, we screen for disaster risk assessment, and if it is warranted, then that assessment will be undertaken. And finally, climate change and vulnerability risk assessment, very important aspect. Now, so all of these activities, would give rise to the need for expertise and consultancy services. And some of the areas for which we would require expertise, environmental management, environmental engineering, climate change, biodiversity, land use planning, water resources. And this is because, when we're doing assessments, no one skill set could because of the broad components of our environment, and we define our environment to include people, which is why we work very closely with the social sector division, where Martin Martin is from. So there's no one skill set for these providing services, because for ESIA, it would require a team cutting across environment, social, and also gender skills. Then in addition to that, you know, we require for some of our projects, project management skills, technical proposal writing, institutional assessment, strategic planning, climate change financing, and that's becoming much more important these days. And just to touch on some of the opportunities, so just to put everything into context then, our project sources would come from, one, the capital projects, and those are the ones that William spoke about, and also Martin. So if Martin and William gets a capital project, they also give us work. And our work requires specialized skill set, some of which we referred to earlier. So the capital projects are a source of our business opportunities, and this is ongoing. Our technical assistance projects, which most of which are developed within our unit on a standalone basis, will also require skills for those, expertise. Then the adaptation fund projects and the green climate change projects, I should have said earlier, I omitted to say that the bank, you know, is accredited to both the adaptation fund and the green climate fund. So by virtue of this, we would assist our BMCs, our bar member countries, to build their capacity so to enable them to access funds from these two sources. So that again represents another avenue for opportunities. So let us explore a little bit now on some of the opportunities. We don't have a lot because, as I said, most of the time we provide the support to the various sectors for the capital projects. So we'll always be having the demand there. The demand is driven for environment and for climate change and for disaster risk management from these capital projects. But of course, we have one project which is ongoing and for which a procurement notice was recently issued. And this is the project known as Building Resilience and Adaptive Capacity to Climate Change and Disaster Risk in the Kalinago territory, which is in Dominica. And there we have a package of activities for which, you know, consultants are required. And this in total amounts to 2.1 million US. And one of the main things to be done there is the construction of a multipurpose center. There will also be training in disaster risk management and climate change adaptation. Then the development of plans, sustainability plans for the area, and the development of a territory development plan for the area. So they're expected to acquire service consultancy services starting in between April to May. And this is it. So just to respond to any questions that you now have, and also maybe to say that in the area of for the Green Climate Fund projects, we'll be having other projects coming on soon. And also to note that for two of our projects, we have two readiness projects now being implemented. And one of these projects, which is in Belize, the main firm hired is Willis Towers Watson, which is a UK-based firm. So there is always opportunity, and there will be opportunities for more work in this area. So that ends my brief presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention. Any questions apart from the one that Nicole asked? And maybe I should go to that now with the, Nicole, could you repeat your question though?
Hi, Hopton. Good morning.
Yes, and it's good to see your name again, Nicole, and hear your voice.
Yes, it's been a while. It's
Yes,
been
it is,
a while.
Yeah.
Really great to reconnect. So my question was related to, and I'm just going back to actually read it so that I read it exactly. So it was whether or not these climate resilience projects, or how these climate resilience projects are looking at the nexus between climate and gender, specifically with regards to an approach for climate finance, accessing climate finance, but of course on the other side as well, in terms of implementation.
Very good question. And as a matter of fact, it was only yesterday that I had a meeting with one of our gender specialists here discussing this very topic, the financing aspect of it. Or just to back up a little bit to say that our gender policy, refers to or requires that climate change that gender be integrated in our climate change projects and also environmental projects. Likewise, our climate resilience strategy, speaks to the need for gender equality. So we are on very good footing there, firm footing. I should say though that in terms of the developing financing instruments, we are a bit behind on that, but it's something that we're working on. And the meeting yesterday was meant to energize that process. As a matter of fact, also we are in the process of developing or revising our environmental and social review procedures, and this area will definitely be strengthened. So while I can say that it is something on the table, we have not been as proactive as some of the other banks, but we are getting there, Nicole. We are, because gender is such an important thematic area now, and has gotten sufficient recognition that it can be leveraged to develop financing instruments.
Okay, thanks. I sent a note just if we can connect by email so I can share some more information on that as well.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, then, fantastic. If you have any more questions for Hopton, please put them in the chat and we will continue.
There was another question though, Mish.
Oh.
There was another question which I can't remember. So William did pass on a question to me from earlier, but I can't recall which.
Well, it's in the chat, so I just ask if you can respond in the chat. If we'll certainly have time at the end, but at least let's just proceed to the other presentation, which would be on trade facilitation, which will be delivered by Ashaki Goodwin, Operations Officer, Regional Cooperation and Integration, and that's part of the Private Sector Development Division. Ashaki, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. I will now share my screen, but before I do that, I am just going to drop a link in the chat box that relates to one of our flagship projects here in the RCI unit, so colleagues can have a bit more information on that. And I'll share my screen now. Okay, let me just go into. Okay, great. Good morning again. My name is Ashaki Goodwin, and I sit in the Regional Cooperation and Integration Unit in the bank. We are located in the Private Sector Division, and we are the focal point for matters relating to regional integration, cooperation, international trade, as well as coordinating the bank's relationship with regionally based institutions such as the Caribbean Community, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS Commission, and the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. So over time, you will see that these organizations will have a number of technical assistance grants from us that we manage. Over the last few years as well, we have done a number of consultancy exercises with the Organization of American States, the OAS, to provide assistance on matters relating to international trade, port, and maritime commitments. Currently, we have 2 projects with them, and for one project specifically, the one that we're starting in Belize, I know that there may be consultancy opportunities there, and that's to develop a trade electronics single window, which I'll speak a bit more about later. So the Rci Programming, as I've stated, our initiatives tend to focus on international trade as well as advancement of the economic integration agenda for the CSME, the OECS, as well as to assist our BMCs to meet their World Trade Organization obligations. Recently, we have gotten quite a few requests from our countries to assist them with meeting their trade facilitation agreement compliance, as well as technical barriers to trade. And some of those technical barriers to trade projects often are linked to the bureaus of standards in countries. Presently, in terms of our portfolio, we have oversight of the Economic Partnership Agreement and CSME Standby Facility for Capacity Building, and that is financed by the 11th European Development Fund and is valued at euro 8.75 million. We currently have in our portfolio just over 15 active projects, and those are in all CARICOM countries as well as the Dominican Republic. And those projects tend to focus on increasing trade, deepening integration and economic development, increasing competitiveness, market access, as well as exports in targeted sectors. This is the second occasion that the bank is managing such a facility for the European Union, and we think that this puts us in a unique position to manage additional funds for the EU. And with those projects, our countries have a great interest in them because they are, while they're small pockets of monies, they tend to give the countries direct assistance on their priority sectors. So the types of projects that we focus on in the RCI unit: the development of electronic single windows. As I mentioned before, this is a project that we have just started with Belize, and the Organization of the American States, they are partnering with us on that project. And through those types of engagements, they often look for regional consultants to be part of their team. Another consultancy that we're actively working on with Belize, and they will put out the request for expression of interest during the course of April, is for a trade facilitation study that will look at time release. And simply, that is focusing on import and export procedures, how quickly goods moved throughout the ports and across borders. And finally, on this slide is the development of risk-based systems for the movement of trade. And most of our countries come to us, as I mentioned, to assist them with meeting their WTO compliance. And this is one of them, where we are developing risk-based systems for agricultural products to move across borders. These projects tend to focus on not just consultancies, but including providing the countries with equipment and ICT support. We currently have a project titled the Maritime Single Window, and that project is being implemented by CARICOM Impacts, and it focuses on risk-based management, development of software, as well as provision of hardware for OECS countries. For that specific project, we are going to be doing targeted work in Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And those packages could look at anything from consultancies as well as equipment to assist them with implementing the Maritime single window. Then we are often looking for project management professionals, whether it is project officers or project coordinators, to assist our countries with successfully implementing projects. Then we have communication and visibility. Currently, we have a project with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, specifically with the Bureau of Standards, and they're going to be developing a communication strategy. So that is a procurement package that will go out during the course of April. Then we have a number of other projects that will be coming on board that will look at digital marketing, development of project videos, and other communication tools. Now, these are all important for trade, because if we want to increase trade, we want to increase exports, there is that communication and visibility aspect of it that has to be enhanced. Then, of course, you have capacity building for MSMEs, farmers, clusters, and business support organization. In St. Lucia, we will be starting a project shortly that will focus on assisting farmers and pack houses to meet the good agricultural practices standards. And I will speak a little bit more on that. So in terms of active portfolio, these are just some thematic areas and where those projects are located. So we have just approved a project to Antigua and Barbuda, and it relates a lot to what Martin would have mentioned on the TVET side. And in Antigua and Barbuda, we'll be doing consultancies to develop a TVET strategy, sustainability plans, as well as providing training and equipment to the National Training Agency there. We're doing a similar exercise with St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and that project will be approved in April, where we are supporting training and accreditation for spa providers, musicians, people in the arts industry as well. Then we have 2 projects in Jamaica focusing on market access, as well as enhancing the agro-processing subsector. And that specific project, I think that procurement package closes either today or tomorrow, where they are looking for equipment relating to agro-processing equipment. Then we have the Dominican Republic. You might say Dominican Republic, this is the CDB. Dominican Republic is not a borrowing member country, but as I mentioned, because we are managing these funds on behalf of the European Union, this is the 3rd occasion where we are providing a grant to the Dominican Republic. And this project, valued just $324,000, will be providing cold storage support to a number of pack houses in the Dominican Republic, as well as consultancies and training to greenhouses and clusters. We're also looking at assisting the colleagues in Dominican Republic as well as St. Lucia in implementing a food and safety management system. And all of this will lead to them getting accredited for ISO. Then we have the technical barriers to trade. And I would say for the last 6-7 years or so, the bank, we've done a lot of work in this area, specifically with the bureaus of standards. And that typically looks like providing them with consultancies to close gaps, because again, all these bureaus, they are trying to achieve a certain accreditation, ISO accreditation. So whether it's consultancies or assisting them to purchase equipment, whether it's for metrology, mass and volume. In Barbados, over the last 2 weeks, we had the commissioning of the Bureau of Standards lab for the BNSI. And we will be doing a number of those projects across the region: Belize, St. Kitts and Nevis, Grenada, the Bahamas, just to name a few. Then we have support to the private sector. And we are about to approve a project for Antigua and Barbuda to the tune of 290,000 euros. As I mentioned, these are discrete projects, but they assist the countries with meeting their regional and international commitments, and also for them to do projects that are on their priority sectors. And this will focus on development of a private sector and export strategy. Similarly, in Suriname, we will be providing support to the private sector to assist them with marketing and branding to support their MSMEs. Suriname wants to trade more in CARICOM, so they would like to increase awareness of their products as well as to meet the compliance of the individual countries. And those are just a few. I've shared the website link for our projects, and on there you will find more information about our projects when they're approved, and we try to be very timely with when we publish our general procurement notices and procurement plans so that we can garner interest for these. Just an additional point to end, what we find sometimes, because of the specialized nature of our consultancies, it has been difficult to get consultants. So we may have to do advertising 2 or 3 times, but I would hope that through exercises like what we're doing today, that we can garner additional interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashaki. At this time, I'm inviting questions. Are there any questions for Ashaki? Okay, number of questions. Okay, let's start with Mandan first.
I have a question.
Who's that?
Yeah.
Who had, may we start with Mandan first, please?
I have a question. Can I go ahead?
Who is?
That's fine. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I would like to thank Shaki for her presentation and the CDB for the work it's doing with the private sector support in the region, and in particular the issue of facilitating the establishment of single electronic windows in some of the countries. Because the chambers of commerce in the region, the private sector organization that we look at, which is CARICHAM, that covers about 21 chambers of commerce in 19 countries, starting from the Bahamas to Suriname, strongly advocates the use of the single window to expedite goods clearance at the through customs and so on. I think this is a very good project, like the one they've started in Belize, and I encouraged the CDB to facilitate the establishment of such a measure in many of the countries, which complies with the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, where several actions must be taken by the countries in order to meet the objective of reducing red tape and bureaucracy in trade and business. And again, I commend the bank for its effort in that direction, and perhaps they could look at some more projects to really make the trading and business environment much easier, so that the environment for encouraging investment in those areas can be improved. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, let's hear from Denroy.
Hi, good morning. I am representing my manager, Mr. Tenroy Tillett. We are actually an IT vet, part of the TVET system in Belize City. And what caught my interest specifically was a project that was being undertaken for skills training. So I was wondering how more or less, well, definitely our interest is that, because we do have the desire to upgrade our TVET to the standards, especially since we're trying to reach CVQ standards. So my question is simply, how do I go about doing that more or less? What are the processes that needs to be done for us to do a bid for that?
Sure. Can I ask you to repeat that question again, please? Sorry.
We were interested, specifically, the one that caught our attention was when you were presenting about skills training. I believe it was being done in Antigua, where they were doing a TVET strategy, sustainable plans. We are also a TVET in the country of Belize, and we were interested in bidding for it. Well, we would like to submit a proposal along that same line, more or less. So I guess my question is, how do we go about doing that, or how do we start that process?
Sure. So and you can tell me if I'm interpreting you correctly. So you would like to know how you could bid on those types of TVET related projects?
No, actually, we would want that project for our
type of support. Good. So what you can do is I will drop my information in the chat, and please feel free to contact me and we can set up a meeting.
Thank you so much. That would be greatly appreciated, ma'am.
Yes, because for us, people often don't see the linkage between TVET education and trade. But the fact is that people move across borders as well. And for them to move across borders, it means that their capabilities have to be enhanced. So that is where the TVET and trade linkage tends to come in. Also, it's part of the framework for the CARICOM single market and economy. So at the bank, we work along with Martin and other colleagues in SSD to improve the TVET infrastructure, whether it's through physical infrastructure, legislation, training, or strategies like the one we're doing in Antigua and Barbuda.
Wow, that's exactly what we're interested in. And we do see the link indeed. We know that we are part of CARICOM. It goes with labor moving across countries. And we're also very familiar with CANTA, the Caribbean Association of National Training Agencies. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much again. Moving on, let's hear from Mandan, please, Kisun.
Hello, good morning. So I'm interested in knowing whether the bank is supportive or takes a role in funding innovative projects. What I mean by that, let me give you an example. Carbon capture storage is, especially for the Caribbean, a very new field. Very new. The success and rate of success for the facilities needed to be set up to establish this project is uncertain because it's a pilot project. I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, Trinidad or Barbados would have recently signed on to a carbon capture utility storage project. My question is the bank inclined to fund such projects?
That probably might be a question for the procurement unit more so than Ashaki.
Yeah, I don't know if William's on the call, because I could start with a couple of observations and I might ask William to come in. But I mean, I think it's less of a procurement rather than a strategic question for the bank. So we do look to certainly intervene in spaces where the private sector is not already providing solutions. And certainly our mandate is very much driven towards clean energy, renewable energy. I mean, I can give you a couple of examples, and this is certainly coming from a non-technical perspective. But for example, in the area of geothermal, there has been a problem with the risk of identifying resources. So we've worked with other partners to bring grant financing to test for resources in viable markets, working with those governments so that if the resource is proved, then it's possible for private investors to come in and actually invest in plants. We're also looking at technologies for deep water, air conditioning, cooling. But I think I'll ask William to come in and perhaps speak specifically to that area, because that is a little bit outside of my technical domain. William, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
If I may, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, if I may, crave your indulgence. The point of it is exactly that, because part of carbon capture along the lines, because I'm in Guyana, ExxonMobil is seeking to do something called enhanced oil recovery. And that is a carbon capture project that facilitates the capturing of carbon from the environment, and instead of releasing it into the air, pumps it back towards the acquisition of oil. That is just one area. But because it is not established, the only other country I do believe that does that is Brazil. But it will be with private partners such as Exxon in collaboration with funding from the bank.
Okay, at least based on having been exposed to some of the CDB material, especially in the previous session that we had, I think one of the things that one ought to keep in mind is that the borrowing countries are the ones that would approach the bank for many of the projects that will eventually get financed. So is it something that the government of Guyana sees as a need and thus would put it forward as an area, and that does not necessarily preclude the bank, I guess, from, based on whatever its strategies might be, to identify areas where it believes that maybe some grant financing could be made available, probably for some sort of, I guess, studies and exploratory work to be done. I don't know if there's any, whether William or Doug wants to add anything else, as we have some more questions that at least I want to get to shortly.
So I just reached out to the head of our sustainable energy unit just to put the question to him directly, since I could respond in general, but with regard to the specifics. And he did note that the carbon capture initiatives are being actively examined by the bank at the moment, and clearly the bank is interested in innovation, managing the risks of projects, as Doug said, is one of the key things as well. So as we got into the geothermal energy space, that was about de-risking the very high level of risk in the initial phases of geothermal energy exploration, and the same will apply elsewhere. So the bank targeted accessing specific resources to do that from other development partners, and supported St. Vincent, I mentioned specifically before, but other borrowing member countries as well. So that's the same approach that we'll take, but it's about looking at the technologies, looking at the risk, and then trying to come up with the sorts of solutions and instruments that can best support largely borrowing member countries. There's also obviously a private sector development division in the bank as well. And we would know private sector investment is even more risky than the public sector investments normally, but the same sort of approaches would generally apply. So it's about looking at the risk and trying to see how best we can help the client to manage those risks, and identifying appropriate resources to do so. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, William. Nicole, go ahead with your question or comment, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. My questions will be very clear in terms of my area of expertise. So my question for Ashaki, thanks for the presentation, is with regards to whether or not the CDB is currently engaged, or if there is an opportunity for the CDB to be engaged on the WTO initiative on gender and trade. As you know, you may know there was the Buenos Aires Declaration on Gender and Trade that took place quite some time ago, and that will be again on the WTO ministerial conference agenda this year. And one of the things that we're seeing within the gender and trade field is the important need for engaging consultations with the women business support organizations, other business support organizations, and women SMEs, for instance, because it seems in my discussions with one or two countries in the region that there is not much knowledge or, you know, discussion that's taking place in that regard. And that comes back again in terms of that very important gender lens, shall we say, on trade. So is that something that CDB is currently involved in? And if not, would there be some opportunities to have some discussions with you on that?
Thanks, Nicole. So it's so interesting that you should mention that, because about 3 weeks to a month ago, we were approached about supporting trade facilitation and gender initiative. So very much in line with what you have spoken about, and it's something that we are going to consider. Again, while we look at trade, we often like to look at linkages with other cross-cutting themes like gender, climate change, energy security, that type of thing. So please feel free to reach out to me and let's start the discussion, because it's an area that we would like to get into some more, because before, our trade facilitation activities have been very strict trade facilitation and TBT, so the technical barriers to trade, and SPS. But now we definitely see value, and we are getting interest from our countries to move into that direction, to look at trade facilitation and gender. And there's a specific manual that needs to be developed at the regional and national levels to assist the countries to meet the trade facilitation agreement. So these are discussions that we are actively having. Thanks.
Wonderful. Betty, I note your hand is down, but I know you had it up for quite a while. So
thank you, Michelle, for noticing that. This was with regard to something am I pronouncing it? Miss Goodwin. Let me just cover myself. Miss Goodwin said, Ms. Goodwin mentioned that people do not realize the linkages between TVET and trade. And I agree with you, Ms. Goodwin. However, I think regional bodies have a responsibility to demonstrate those linkages. So for example, Martin presented on education/HRD, yet he focused a lot on education, not making mention of the linkage with you, where you were doing training for the private sector. So I think if we're going to be talking people not recognizing the linkages, I think CDB has to make a special effort that when they're making those presentations, that they show the linkages between the different projects as a way of encouraging integration. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
So Michelle, if I can just quickly respond to Betty, and Betty, thanks so much for that. So while it may not have come out in Martin's presentation, just to let you know that, sorry, just to show you that Martin's division and mine, we work closely together to ensure that the work that we're doing in countries, that they're complementary. And again, reinforcing that there is this strong linkage between TVET and movement across borders. So these are discussions that we have regularly internally, and we try to ensure that we're not duplicitous when we are doing these types of activities at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashaki. Are there any last questions? Because we're getting close to the time to wrap up. Or any comments that one would wish to make? All right. Well,
Michelle,
go ahead.
Michelle, could I make? I mean, we must say. I mean, we have to give jacket, and we have to say kudos to CDB for starting this engagement with stakeholders. I don't know of this happening in the past, and it has started. This is the second one I am attending. And I must say the discussions have been very interesting. And so I would like to say again, congratulations for this initiative, and it needs to be continued.
Thank you so much. At least that does hopefully make my work easier in engaging the CDB to continue our conversations. Doug, I think you wanted to say a few words, I think, as we begin to wrap up.
Thanks, Michelle. You can hear me okay? Yes,
go ahead.
Okay, yeah, just on behalf of the bank, I wanted to thank you and Project Calls for arranging this. As I think Betty just said, we welcome the dialogue. There's sometimes frank discussion, but that's good. It's good for us to hear some of the real views coming back from the private sector community. And of course, we want to thank all of the participants today for taking time out of your schedules. We know your time is scarce, so we do really appreciate you participating. I did mention it earlier, but for those who weren't able to attend the previous session that we had, which was more focused on the bank's wider strategic outlook and the procurement process, I would urge that you take the opportunity to look at that recording. I know Michelle will make that available. And we stand ready to continue this dialogue and also to engage with you as necessary. We know things don't always run smoothly. We know there are bumps. And if there are problems, please do reach out to us. So sincere thanks again.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Doug. And just thank you everyone for attending. I think we did have quite a few people and we still do have a number of people on the call, but thank you. It has been a nearly 2-hour session, and we really appreciate you who have stayed till the end. And we're just a few minutes before the top of the hour, but thank you so much again for joining us, and wishing you all a very good and productive rest of day. So take care.
Thank you all.